introductions. And committee, yes, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have two bill introductions. One is 22 RS 2468, which deals with virtual schools and those students under 19 years of age who have dropped out, and just amending to allow more flexibility to reach those kids. And then the other is 22 RS 2424, which would change some of the parameters in the questionnaire testing examination for students, and gives more transparency and more ability for parents to realize that testing and questionnaires are going on.
Other introductions? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got 22 RS 2457, has to do with Kansas State High School Activities Association and mandatory reporting of child abuse and neglect.
All right, thank you. And others, Representative Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce 22 RS 2503 regarding part-time enrollment options.
Right, any other introductions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and proceed. Committee, today's agenda, if you open up your file, you will find that we're going to focus on third grade literacy and the initiative that hopefully we can reach between the State Board of Education and the Legislature and the Department of Education. So I really appreciate everyone being here today. And the second part of today's agenda is learning loss and student achievement. So I've asked our reviser, Nick, to just give us the brief context reference to state assessments, and then we'll have Gabby give us a quick review of what is in front of you, so you'll know what to take a look at on your own, and then we'll jump right in to the presentations that are provided on our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. I don't have anything in particular prepared for you. I was just going to brief what current law says regarding statewide assessments. So the law citation in the KSAs is 725170. This law generally deals with the school district accreditation system, curriculum standards, and statewide assessments. So first, I'll start out that the law requires a state board to establish curriculum standards that reflect high academic standards in the core academic areas of math, science, reading, writing, and social studies. And then the law also requires that the state board must provide statewide assessments in those core areas. And the board with those assessments is to ensure that the curriculum standards and the assessments are compatible. And the law requires these assessments to be administered at least 3 grade levels, and those grade levels are determined by the state board. And also the law says that the state board shall determine the performance levels that are attained on those statewide assessments. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, committee? All right. Yes, Representative Estes.
Just for clarification, if I recall correctly, the different categories the test scores fall into falls under guidance from the Federal Department of Education and federal law.
I'm going to defer to one of the folks behind me, and they will, I bet you'll be able to answer that question directly. And if we don't get an answer to that, I'll follow up with you.
Okay, thank you so much.
And that can fall underneath the student achievement section. So if somebody, maybe Craig, wants to take that, that'd be awesome. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Nick. Gabby, you're next.
Good afternoon, committee. You should have a 1-page in front of you from me with colorful charts on it. This is a high-level look at categories of state aid from fiscal year 2015 to 2021. The middle of the first page has a breakdown of math and ELA, state of Kansas state assessment, all student, all grades, as well as our graduation rate and ACT score for the same years. And then the back, this one's a little bit more salient to your discussion today. I have a breakdown of state assessment data for grade 3 in math and ELA. And I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from committee? So if we're looking at this and we're trying to determine proficiency, we would be looking at the top 2 colors, correct?
Yeah, so level 3 and 4, that's correct. On the back, you can see the color code that career and college ready / proficient would be the gold and orange category.
All right, so specifically for 3rd grade committee, note where we are right now on proficiency in 2021 for 3rd graders, and that would be something hopefully we'd want to address and improve through all kinds of great interventions. Any other questions? All right, thank you. That's very helpful. All right, committee, presentation from Ksde. They've done a great job putting together a little look at 3rd grade literacy. So Brad Neuenswander, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You should all have a PowerPoint presentation that on 3rd grade literacy.
PowerPoint, was that something that was printed or was that something emailed?
Emailed last Friday morning.
Okay.
Friday.
Not that. Okay.
Maybe I can work on that while Craig's looking at it.
Okay. Is there any way for tech to help us put it on the screen or maybe not?
We don't. They're not with us. We didn't know what
Okay.
room we were going to be in, so we sent all the materials in advance.
Okay, well, here's what we can do. You can give us an overview of it, and if you wouldn't mind, if you would resend that, you can send it to Holly, and then we can be sure that everybody in the committee gets it. And generally, we do welcome copies from agencies, so if you ever want to bring hard copies, we welcome those. We do not print copies of individual testimony from lobbyists or anyone else. That's for our representatives to print off themselves. So feel free in the future to bring hard copies if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll have this digitally to everyone by tomorrow. So,
Okay. And that was followed, there's about 18 testimonies, written testimonies. We brought, one of the requests was to have some people from the field. So today you're going to hear, I'm going to introduce Todd Wiedemann, who is going to lead this, but you're going to hear from some school districts and some initiatives across the state on achieving 3rd grade literacy. So, Todd?
all right, welcome, Todd.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you regarding the important work around raising 3rd grade reading achievement in the state of Kansas. My name is Todd Wiedemann. I'm the co-director of Kansas Multi-Tier System of Supports and Alignment Project, otherwise known as Kansas MTSS, and it is housed within the Kansas Technical Assistance System Network, otherwise known as TASN. And before I get started, I do want to recognize the team that's here today, some of whom will be speaking during this presentation. Seated behind me, you'll notice Casey Piney. She is the Director of Teaching and Learning for Clearwater Schools. Jennifer Hansen, English Language Arts District Specialist for Geary County Schools. Jerry Powers, District Literacy Specialist for DeSoto Schools. Dr. Lori Curtis, Early Literacy and Dyslexia Program Manager for Kansas State Department of Education. Kevin Davis, Co-Director, Kansas Technical Assistance System Network, TASN. And Joanna Mccrell, Humanities Program Manager, including English Language Arts for Kansas State Department of Education. So when we talk about 3rd grade literacy and raising reading achievement for every student by 3rd grade, it's a very complex problem, and it has a very multifaceted solution. The possibility of coming together to work on this began in December when the State Board of Education and the legislation decided to partner on this endeavor. And we are here in part today to describe the components that will be necessary to be put in place in order to create, implement, scale, and sustain a statewide comprehensive plan and approach to achieving third grade literacy for every Kansas student. First, let me be clear. Social emotional growth is measured locally, as is an existing Kansas State Board of Education outcome for schools to measure their progress in meeting their definition of a successful high school Kansas graduate. We know from a large body of research on social emotional learning, otherwise known as SEL, that high-quality SEL programming leads to improved academic performance up to 11 percentile points, decreases in anxiety and behavior issues, among other benefits. These stats alone are from one landmark meta-analysis of 213 studies. We also know that SEL produces a strong return on investment, a return of 11 to 1, meaning that for every dollar invested, there's an $11 return, saving from cost otherwise spent on costly interventions, remediation, dropout prevention, recovery, and et cetera. So when we start talking about third grade literacy, raising achievement, what exactly might that look like? When you have access to the PowerPoint, I'll call your attention to slide number 5. On slide 5, you'll see 5 components that'll be necessary to raise the achievement in reading and reach literacy for every student in Kansas by third grade. Those 5 components are knowledgeable teachers and administrators, meaningful assessments, multi-tiered framework, high-quality instructional materials, and pre-K through 16 collaborative efforts. Now, there were several written testimonies also submitted to the committee for consideration. I personally gathered and submitted 14 of those testimonies. They ranged in author from second grade teacher to principal to curriculum director to deputy superintendent to renowned authors in the area of reading instruction and researchers. But they all had passion and they all had common thoughts. And before I turn this over to others to talk more specifically about those 5 common areas and components, I want to highlight just some of the common thoughts from those written testimonies, all of which support the plan that you'll have before you. Those common thoughts from the written testimonies include, but not limited to, the need for a comprehensive assessment plan, including screening, universal screening for all students 3 times a year, progress monitoring and diagnostic assessments available, the need for robust professional development for teachers, pre-teachers, and administrators, including the areas of science of reading, structured literacy, data literacy, and evidence-based instruction and strategies, just to name a few of the topics. The need for administrators to be engaged partners in the learning and the process, not sitting on the sidelines, but actively engaged partners. The need for this work to be pre-K through 16 and a collaborative effort. This effort cannot reside within one silo. It has to be pre-K 16 because 13 through 16 begins before pre-K instruction. The need for ongoing coaching and support at the district level. It is great to have it at the state level, but we have to have ongoing support and coaching at the district level. The need for a multi-tier system of supports. the need for language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling training for all teachers of reading, current and future teachers included, as well as administrators. That training you may have heard of as letters training. And finally, the need for assurances from legislators to provide adequate and equitable funding for all of these components to be structured, implemented, scaled, and sustained over time with fidelity. I'd like to now introduce Jerry Powers to begin discussing the 5 components in a little more detail.
Welcome, Jerry.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and the committee. My name is Jerry Powers. I have taught in the DeSoto School District for, I've kind of lost count, but it's been about 25 years as a 3rd grade teacher and as a reading specialist. And this is my first year as our district's literacy specialist. So I oversee K through 12 now. So I'm on a big learning curve past elementary. Several years ago, when we had the Dyslexia Task Force, I was a member of that task force. And that really began my learning of what we really needed to do differently system-wide. And when I look at that, what came out of that process, all Kansas accredited schools are now required to utilize structured literacy as the explicit and evidence-based approach to teaching literacy skills to all students and to promote early intervention for students with characteristics of dyslexia. That right there started me on a huge learning curve. I knew a lot about dyslexia, but since that time, I have become a district letters trainer and a national trainer. And I've learned a lot about what we need to do differently and better in Kansas. Even though that was and is a really bold move for our state, and I'm really proud of what we did on that committee, because without it, there's a lot of children that are getting lost, and they're not getting what they need to help them reach their full potential. And we know that. But what the reality we have in Kansas right now is that many, many districts are very deeply entrenched in whole language and in guided reading. And I say that because I was. I thought that kids who struggled needed something different than all children. And what I've come to learn is that if we expect Kansas teachers to become really good at teaching reading, we've got to develop them professionally, because the difference between guided reading or whole language and structured literacy is vast. It's a huge difference. And so if we're going to get teachers to that point where they are knowledgeable about the science of reading, hence they're knowledgeable about structured literacy, we have got to train them. And one of the ways to train them is we've got to give them high quality materials. And that sounds like an obvious kind of thing, but it gets really difficult because publishing companies are about making money. And so there's a lot of materials floating around out there that have the stamp of structured literacy on them. And so it's very difficult when you're a teacher in the midst of everything else you're supposed to do, to be a part of your district's vetting process and to look at materials and have the time to really slow your brain down to think clearly and critically about what is good and what would be good for your students. And teachers realize that materials are valuable. They understand that. When you look at Ed Reports, and they did a poll, the respondents, 55% of teacher respondents said one of their top 5 choices is we need high quality materials. And when I think about the process, though, for us to gain high-quality materials that are very much embedded in structured literacy and the science of reading, districts need help in vetting those materials because there's so many out there. We need help getting it kind of funneled down to several that are really good to look at, because that's more efficient for us to spend our time instead of on looking at so many to look on a few. Also, we need professional development on how do we go about that process of vetting and coming to the conclusion of the program that's best for our district. For example, what is the facilitator's responsibilities? What is the professional learning that evaluators or teachers at the table need to be looking for, so that it doesn't come down to, I look at some material and it seems familiar to me. It seems like something I would like, because that's not what we're looking at. We're looking for more specific things, which brings to my third point, when we look at a rubric that would help us to identify what are we looking for specifically in our materials. And in the past, many of those rubrics are very general. Phonics are included. Well, all programs, you could say that. But when you get more specifically like this, phonics skills are practiced by applying letter sound knowledge in decodable texts that match the phonics elements taught, securing phonic decoding. Something more specific like that, so that when you're analyzing these materials, we're going deeper in our thinking. We're analyzing it at a much higher level. We know that high-quality materials that align with the science of reading are what we need to have. Yes, we need to have knowledgeable teachers, teachers who are smarter than any program that's given to them. It's not really an either-or. We need that, and then we need high-quality materials, because this is what teachers do. This is what I have done for the last 20-some years. I hunt for things. I look for things online. I go and I talk to my peers, which, keep in mind, some of your peers may not know much more than you do when it comes to the science of reading. And then you're thinking, okay, I'll create my own. This is not a sustainable system. Because when you look at what we need, that cumulative review, that systematic, very structured, explicit instruction, typically teacher-created materials don't encompass all of that. And so it's inefficient, it's time-consuming, and the students who are hurt the most are the ones who need our tight instruction the most. And that is children in poverty. You're looking at students of color, and you're looking at the students I worked with were just struggling students. And so all students benefit from high quality materials, but we have students that do not have the time for us to waste on creating our own things and hunting for our own things. They need us to know what we're doing and to do it in an efficient way. They need us to get it right and to ensure that we have the right materials and we have knowledgeable teachers in every classroom. This is what I want for my grandchildren. It's what I've always wanted for every student I've had, and we need to want it for every student in Kansas. Thank you so much.
Is Casey next? Okay, great. Welcome, Casey.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Committee. My name is Casey Piney, and I am the Director of Teaching and Learning in Clearwater, Kansas. I'm going to speak today about two of the areas that Mr. Wiedemann had suggested of those five that will build the system that we're looking for to ensure third grade literacy. The first one of those is assessments. We need relevant, meaningful, and assessments to be purposefully and appropriately used. Assessments allow a district or a building or even a teacher to evaluate their effectiveness on their curriculum and instruction. They are essentially feedback to the teacher to know if they're on track with their students or if they're on track as a building or on track as a district. So those assessments are really important to be able to identify our students who are at risk and then to be able to inform our next steps and our instructional decisions with students. I like to call assessments evidence of learning in my district. So we know whether our students are learning and we know whether we're on track with them. Assessments are also, like I was saying, feedback. And feedback is that ongoing process where teachers are communicating information to their students to let them know if they're on track as well, and making sure that students understand what high quality performance looks like and what changes that a student might need to make to meet that goal. So essentially we say, here's mastery, here's where you are, and then here's everything I'm going to give you in between to get you there, to get you to mastery. And we convey that to our students, and we help teach them learning strategies to fill that gap. but we need really good assessments to be able to help us know what that gap is and what needs to happen in between. We also need really good teacher PD and teacher expertise to be able to provide that so teachers know how to fill that gap. Feedback, when done very well, has the potential to have an effect size of 0.92. I'm not sure if you're very familiar about effect sizes, but the hinge point for 1 year of learning and education is 0.4. So essentially, with really good feedback to students and then from students to the teacher, we can get almost 2 years worth of growth. The other area that Mr. Wiedemann spoke about was a multi-tier system of support. You might have also heard it called RTI, and we use them interchangeably often in education. And a multi-tier system of support provides us early identification. We don't want that wait to fail model anymore. We want to identify students early so we can fill that gap early. It also allows us to know what intervention a student might need. And it allows us to give those supports to the student and continually monitor their progress to know whether or not we are having an impact on them. If done really well, again, MTSS can have an effect size of 1.09. That's equivalent of 3 years worth of learning. I said if done really well, and using all of those systems, we can get the growth that we need. Another thing that MTSS does essentially create, or a byproduct of it, is collective teacher efficacy. And collective teacher efficacy, when done really well, has an effect size of 1.36. What that builds is, it builds that collective belief that schools have the skills that it takes to positively impact student outcomes. We need teachers to believe it, but for teachers to be able to believe it, they need the knowledge, they need the experience of overcoming that and helping students overcome. An MTSS system helps build that. When you do get your presentation, you'll want to look at pages 11 and 12. These are findings from a 2014 and a 2020 external evaluation from Ksde on Kansas MTSS. And what they found from this evaluation was when schools had an MTSS system, they had wonderful implementation, and they had a facilitator to be able to help with fidelity. So meaning whatever that was taught or those evidence-based practices that were put in place, the school was truly using them and using them well. They also had a common language that they were able to develop so they could have high-quality discussions. And then most importantly, they were able to sustain over time. We don't want this to happen just 1 year. We want this to be a system that we create. In 2020, additional trends were found. Again, those great discussions were happening. Schools were learning how to analyze their local data and know what to do with it. Believe it or not, sometimes teachers are bombarded with data and they don't always know how to make instructional decisions with it. So having great high-quality PD from Kansas MTSS allowed those districts to know what to do with that data so they could move student learning forward. Importantly, they had coaching and support. Coaching is a very important part of teaching. Coaching, when it is provided alongside with professional development, has a way higher transfer rate into the classroom. So if a teacher would go to a professional development event and come back, research shows only about 5% of that is transferred to the classroom. With coaching, we can get above 90% of that happening in the classroom. And then also, those examples that the trainers were able to provide help schools see this is what it could look like. So that gives them the idea of what they could do in their school to be able to transfer that to their current system. So in closing, before I turn it over to Lori, I want to highlight that what was previously said, that teacher expertise really has the potential to accelerate student learning. John Hattie found in his research that excellence in teaching is the single most powerful influence on achievement. Home, school, and peers only account for 5 to 10% of the variance on school achievement. If you want to invest in something, I would highly suggest you invest in teacher expertise. I'll turn it over to Lori now.
Welcome, Lori. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Committee. My name is Lori Curtis, and I am the very new Program Manager for Early Literacy and Dyslexia for Ksde, and I am very happy to be here today. I was interested in applying for this position because I heard Dr. Watson talk about an initiative that would give the same continual message from preschool through higher education of how we need to prepare our teachers to impact student learning. And I believe this problem as it exists now can only be addressed by making sure we work together. Families, early childhood educators, K-12 teachers, higher education, Ksde, and you. So I'm really excited and happy to hear about this collaborative effort before us. I'm going to talk a little bit about higher education and its role in all of this. The faculty in our teacher preparation institutions have been an important partner with us since the beginning with the Dyslexia Legislative Task Force. They evaluated the International Dyslexia Association standards, looked at where those were in their programs, in their coursework, in their practicum, and then also made plans for embedding changing and embedding those standards into the coursework that they are working on now. We have received assurance forms from every institution as to the changes that are being made and how they are addressing those standards. Higher education will also be an integral part in creating the comprehensive literacy plan that my colleague Joanna Mccrell will talk about in just a bit. Also, this month, I've been in contact with some in higher ed and will continue to be about credentials or opportunities that they have to develop professional development around reading, dyslexia, structured literacy, and the initiatives that we need to support. I think it's really important as we look to the future that we continue to create partnerships with K-12 educators and higher education. I'm excited about our teachers coming out of the classrooms at our institutions ready to hit the ground with the same knowledge that we know our in-service teachers must have to create important improvements in reading. So thank you very much for your time today. I will invite Jennifer Hansen to come to the podium.
Okay, in committee, I'm just going to pause for just one moment. If you are interested in following along with the testimony, it is in your inbox. You can find it from Holly. If you want to wait and pull it up at another time, that's fine too. I just wanted to know. Welcome.
Hello, Madam Chairman and committee. My name is Jennifer Hansen. I've been in education for about 22 years. I've had the opportunity to teach in Louisiana, Germany, Virginia, and have been in Kansas the last 10 years. Professional development is very important for our teachers. I am currently now the District English Language Arts Specialist in USD 475. And I've been able to come from the classroom to a district, to an instructional coach to the district, and seeing the need for it. We need PD that gives educators the knowledge of how to teach reading, but also how to take that knowledge and apply it within their classroom. It's so great to have that knowledge of how to teach it, but if you don't know how to apply it to those student needs, it's not doing much for our students. A lot of times what I hear from the schools I go and visit is, how do I help this student now that I see there is a deficit? How do I know what diagnostic to give after I give the screener? Finally, what interventions can I use in my classroom? And this is what is needed for our teachers and administrators. They need that professional development on how to use the knowledge that they have. We're seeing a lot of teachers coming in that were whole language. So they were never taught the phonics. I was lucky, I was taught phonics when I was younger. But a lot of our teachers are not. We need to give them that professional development. They need the time to learn. They need the time to look at data and see and make those groups within their classroom so they can do the most for our students. When we talk about the number one influence for student achievement, it is teachers. Teacher estimates of achievement currently has an effect size of 1.46, which is about a year improvement in reading. So when we take those students and we give them the teacher observation, the teacher reflection on the data, the teacher able to make the groups that are meaningful for that student, we could see a year's worth of growth. These judgments come from questioning, observing written work, presentations, how the students react to increased challenges and assessments on tests. Letting teachers see you don't always have to have a written paper to see how a student is achieving. Teaching them how to look at the observations. I've been a letters trainer since 2013, and I've gone through the 2nd edition and the 3rd edition, and we've started a 40-people cadre within our district. And my hope is that this knowledge would take from them to their peers in their schools. I'm also hopeful that, well, one thing I want to say is I had a teacher, they took a pre-test for this letters class, and she's been teaching for a while, and she was like, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know I was a kindergarten teacher, and I didn't know how to teach my kids to read. I thought I was doing a great job, but it seems that I don't know everything about teaching reading. It's our job to give the teachers the instruments they need and the knowledge to help all of our students. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Is Joanne next, or is it Kevin? Joanne?
Kevin's not speaking.
Oh, okay.
Unless you have questions.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome, Joanne.
I'm Joanne. I'm not Kevin. That would be an interesting turn of events for you. I first want to say thank you to Todd Wiedemann, Casey Penny, Jennifer Hansen, and Dr. Lori Curtis. They have started to weave a web of why we need to move forward in improving our 3rd grade literacy. They've given you a great statistics, expert testimony based upon their experience that will lead us towards our next step. So thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, my name is Joanna Mccrell. I am the Humanities Program Manager for our Kansas State Department of Education. New title, what does it really mean? What it means is I'm still in charge of English Language Arts, K-12 standards and assessments. And I've also got a few more things on my back as far as KELPA and English learners. So looking at reading holistically along with my partner, Dr. Lori Curtis. So the important question that needs to be answered now is how might we measure 3rd grade literacy? And on slide 20, if you reference that slide, if you have the presentation at this point, there's an important factor that we need to consider. And that important factor is, what is the difference between state assessments and K-2 screening? Because you've heard both testimonies given today, and you have the Kansas ELA scores, reading scores in front of you. So what's the difference? There's an important transition that happens at the 3rd grade level. And you may have heard of these terms instead of whole language and phonics. You may have heard of learning to read. Learning to read we look at as far as pre-K to 2, pre-kindergarten to 2. And basically what that really means is mapping that symbol to a sound. And doing that symbol to a sound, to words, to phrases, to eventually reading text, connected text preferably, words that are have meaning associated to them, in which we're not asking kids to do that yet, K-2. They're in our standards. We have rigorous standards. We are asking them to start to comprehend text in 1st grade with the support of teachers. And in 2nd grade, end of 1st grade, beginning of 2nd grade, that starts to become more independent in nature depending upon the skill level of the kid that arrives in kindergarten. So the thing that you need to know is in kindergarten and in 1st grade, most of that mental effort is due to trying to figure out the words. What are those words saying? What are those letters saying? Most passages, when we start to look as far as Torgenson is concerned, and it's cited by Motes I forgot my other person, but it's within your testimony that when we look at a second grade reading assessment, comprehension assessment, that is not what a third grade Kansas state assessment looks like. What they're saying that is at the second grade is really the ability to read single words. It's not about putting it together. It's not about trying to figure out the background knowledge that I need to activate in my head to bring to those words to make meaning. It's not about figuring out what that vocabulary word that I don't know what that means, but I'm going to guess about it because over here it says this. Kids in kindergarten, first grade don't have the mental capacity to do that yet. Okay, so they're learning that in second grade. But yet, when we talk about the K through 2 assessments that are happening within multi-tiered frameworks, that's not what they're looking at, guys. They're looking at that sight to sound mapping of figuring out the letters to the words to the phrases. Okay? So then what happens amazingly in fourth grade is we start reading to learn. What does that mean? That's all the things that I was just telling you about. That was the thing as far as the background knowledge of, well, you know what? If you grew up on a farm, you know where eggs come from. You know how to go collect eggs without getting attacked. And you know to wear shoes, not this kid, you know to wear shoes to go pick up the eggs because you're going to get like 5 tetanus shots over the course of your life when you turn 13 because you stepped on rusty nails. Okay? I bring all that to my experience as a reader when I'm reading about chickens. Our kids in Kansas City don't bring that unless they have that experience. And that's what we call background knowledge. It has to be activated. It's harder than heck to teach kids. You can't teach that. That comes from experience. So that's one of the things that happens in fourth grade. Knowing your words. Unfortunately, I was not a kid that grew up in a family that had college education. My dad was a 16-year-old GED student, and my mother just graduated high school. I started with the 30 million word gap when I entered into kindergarten. I can't overcome that in 2 years. I can't. No matter how great my teacher is, I can't overcome that in 2 to 3 years. That's what we're asking kids to do at that third grade assessment. Another thing that happens, sorry, I got a cold, is the verbal reasoning. Verbal reasoning is the inferencing piece, and that inferencing piece is horrid on our kids. Elementary teachers do an excellent job of trying to figure out what that inference piece is in the forms of using their own experiences, like I talked about earlier, and reading other world of TV shows and activating it through pictures and diagrams and charts. However, when we get to text and combining multiple pieces of text that they've independently read, our kids can't do that at third grade. I was a middle school teacher. I can't do it there either. So then we also get into language structures as far as your sentence structure and how you can combine multiple pieces together. And you also get into connotations of words, of how I use those words. Am I getting my point clear to you as what happens in fourth grade? We're testing it at third. We're testing it at third. So, when I say we are caught in a transition of learning to read to reading to learn, we are. And we have to consider those kids that are in front of us and do the things that these wonderful teachers stood up and told you that we need to do. We need to provide interventions for them. We need to provide teacher training. We need to do those things. So now I get to the point of what we need to measure, okay? In order to get both of those together, that piece that I told you, learning to read and reading to learn together, is what we call reading comprehension. So what do we need to do? Todd Wiedemann started off with you on slide 5. Slide 5 is what I say is what we need to do. It is an overall starting to look at a comprehensive literacy plan for the state of Kansas. The state of Kansas does not have one. We know that other state agencies that have moved forward with a comprehensive state literacy plan has made huge, significant gains in third grade reading achievement. Louisiana, Mississippi, Rhode Island, New Mexico has come on board with high quality instructional materials. Nebraska has come on board with high quality instructional materials. What we put in front of kids' faces and in teachers' hands matters. We have to get them reading complex text. Because right now, it was testified that high quality instructional materials, teachers go out on the internet, usually lower grade level, usually less complex text. We can't give kids text that they already know how to read. That's not teaching reading. That's reading practice. We need to give kids text that they have difficulty reading and competent teachers that know how to intervene using that text to show them how it's different. So a comprehensive literacy plan is a must. I'm working on it. I already have stakeholders moving forward with that. These ladies, of course, I'll ask to join with me. The gentleman behind you, I already have reached out to. So the other point is that we need to look at what, I can't remember who was saying it, as far as teachers being able to look at what they're teaching and know how to intervene. We are working on that as well as another piece as far as meaningful assessments of giving teachers a tool that they can look at and assess where their kids are by what their kids are doing. We have 6th through 12th grade, 6th through 10th grade done. I will have K through 5 done before July. So giving teachers those materials to be able to look at and know their content and say, oh, I didn't know this kid's higher than I thought for 3rd grade. We've never had anything like that before. It first came out during Navigating Change, 2020, when we were shut down, and what were we supposed to do? We're working on that as well. The other piece is that we need to have the ability for districts to analyze and use data. They don't know how to do it. Casey testified towards you on that. They don't know how to do it with the assessment either. That's also something that I am. Had a good old John Tedit today around noon. You probably heard me over here if you were there, across the street. But we are working on that as well, so that the same message of what is complex text will be the same throughout the state of Kansas, whether you are in Emporia, Kansas, or up at St. Mary's, or out in Oberlin. So I'm telling you all the things we're doing because our teachers have answered the call. Every teacher that I reached out to, as far as a program manager, has said yes to me. They want a comprehensive literacy assessment that has these things. Because right now we do not have equity across the state for kids in the classroom. You have to have a qualified teacher to do that. You have to have a teacher that knows, oh, by the way, whole language and phonics, whole language, quick little example here. You learn every word. Every word you know how to read, say, do, you learn that by sight. Let me show you as far as phonics is concerned in that progression. I want you to think of something that you use to sweep your kitchen floor. Now spell it. Two things happen on that question. The first one is you picture whatever you use. I say you use a broom, okay? And then the second one happens is that picture of how you spell that word comes into your mind. It's called orthographic mapping. We know when kids learn how to read because they can do that skill. It's in their brain, like you just experienced it. And if you didn't experience it that way, then you know you probably have troubles reading and or writing and spelling. So what do we need to consider to measure? We're going to start to look at measuring the implementation of our teachers' knowledge and our administrators' knowledge. The teacher knowledge is the #1 indicator of success in the classroom. Administrators, #2. If they don't know it, they can't do it. And if they can't do it, it's not equitable for every third grader to be treated the same way and have the same expectations. Everything on slide 18 goes towards that. And you cannot expect, like what they said earlier, to have someone who goes to a training and the only person that goes to the training and then goes back and can implement it seamlessly. I had 30 years of instruction to be able to teach kids who are dyslexic to read. To reach a 7th grader who can read at a 1st grade level and to accelerate them within a year and a half to read on grade level, guys. It takes training and it takes help and it takes support. And we owe our teachers and we owe our kids that.
All right, thank you very much for providing the presentation. I'm going to kind of sum up why we are doing this today and where we're going from here. And then committee, if you would note that there are email addresses both on our agenda today as well as the PowerPoint, which is in your email. So you can maybe have a conversation back and forth with some of the presenters today. But I want to bring a few items up and why this is so important. If we look at proficiency and the numbers that were provided by Gabby when we got here today, we see that the state assessments, just using that one screening tool, in 2015 for all students, about 48% of all 3rd graders were not proficient. So they were in the lower 2 levels. If you fast forward to 2021, that group that's not proficient at the state assessment, which is supposed to be based on the standards that are set by the state board and the curriculum is supposed to match the standards, grew to 61%. Approximately 61%. So our goal is to shift, make a new trend in Kansas, not a trend downward, but a trend upward. And so your ideas, we want those ideas as we incorporate it. In terms of how it's applied at this local level and how you teach reading, that is, you are the experts, you will handle that, you will do all of those things. But we want an overall vision for how to support you. And I think that I'm just going to share a couple of things. Your slide number 5 says it has a 3rd grade reading literacy plan. And it says that we need knowledgeable teachers and administrators. And I'm not sure how we're going to measure that if we're trying to move the needle on this, even though it is the most important. Then you have meaningful assessments. We know how to measure those. Multi-tiered framework. I think that's a way to achieve. That's a tool that you use. But I wanted to offer some thoughts on this real briefly, that it's our, I would hope that it would be our role to support you and that that we express that we need support for English literacy in third grade. It's also the responsibility of local education providers to provide the programming and services to ensure that it happens. And for those that it's not happening, they're not proficient, then we need to be sure that we recognize them and that we have the necessary interventions. And what are they specifically? Are they after school hours, after school programs? Are they summer school programs? What are we going to do for the kids that can't reach that level? And specifically, what are we going to focus on for reading competency? Is it phonics? Is it vocabulary development? You've mentioned science of reading. So specifically, what are those things? So that's kind of what I hope we can work towards, is all of these things, the PK to 16 collaborative efforts, that may mean something over the long haul and over the entire system, but I'd like to just zero in and be like, what can we do in the classroom right now, and how can the legislature support you, and how can we see meaningful outcomes? So I hope that helps explain a little bit, and then I hope the committee will take time to review it and to respond back via email. Sound good? Okay, the next item on the agenda that we hope to wrap up with is learning loss and learning gains, and taking a look at achievement. And so I think, let's see, we have Craig Niswander. Craig is here, and Brad. So who's going to go first? We learned that it's Nuenswander and Niswander, so Brad's the Nuenswander. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it will all be me this afternoon. Craig gets the afternoon off. And I do want to thank everybody that came. They don't get a lot of pleasure out of listening to me, and I know they have a long driving to Abilene, to Clearwater, so you won't offend me if you get up and leave for the rest of this. But I do want to thank you for being here. You should, I hope by now, have received the presentation from me that starts out K-12 budget. The second slide says academic performance. If you want to refer to that, I'm going to skim through this and just hit the highlights. As Nick mentioned earlier, and I hope Representative Estes, this might address maybe a question you had. The state a lot of times people are like, well, the federal government requires, well, the state required first that we set standards and assess. Now the state says we assess at 3 levels. The federal goes beyond, so it's grades 3 through 8 and once in high school, but we're still addressing meeting the state's requirement. The biggest driver, though, is the federal government. For us to receive all the federal dollars, there's a lot of other things we have to do. We have to identify certain schools based off of performance. We have to look at subgroups. So what Nick shared in statute was basically kind of a broad. It doesn't get into detail. Federal was No Child Left Behind. Now it's Every Student Succeeds Act. Gets a lot more into detail. But it goes beyond state requirement, but a lot of people forget that the state requires us to assess also. The big difference in Kansas from other states is the statute also says we as a state stay out of curriculum. That is decided locally. So while we can help with professional development, we can look at best practices that have been researched. Kansas never selects textbooks. We never, those are all local. We're not Texas or other states that select textbooks. Overall, slides, the first set of slides, when you look at math or English language arts, I'm not going to go through each slide, I'll just summarize. Academically has been going down since 2010. You ask teachers, you ask school administrators, because that's when general operating funds after the Great Recession started cutting general fund budgets. And while money went into a lot of other places, whether it's capers, bonds, whatever, It wasn't till 2017 and the legislature appropriated, you could start seeing a leveling, and then the COVID hit. And there are some highlights in here. For the first time since 2009, we saw African-American students and students of poverty tick up when other students, and started seeing a little bit of closing of the achievement gap. Last year during the pandemic, special needs students in English language arts actually improved. So hats off to all of those teachers out there during a pandemic was able to get special needs students the supports that they needed. And while a lot of kids were remote, most districts tried to make sure that their special needs students were getting the supports they needed. And we saw that in English language arts. Just a couple other things. The pre-ACT in 2019-20, that was the first year that the state paid for every student to have the pre-ACT. If you look at slide 10 or 9, I know it says 2020-21, it was actually 19-20. So I'll get that corrected to you. That first year we had about 74% of the kids, 9th graders, take the pre-ACT. What that does is measure, are they on track to score at college readiness on the ACT? So it was nice in the first year, we already had 74% of those kids take that. With that, 42% were on track with math. This was freshmen, 52 with reading, and 70% with English. So the next slide, on slide 10, we see the same trends with ACT. This is just reporting from 2017. They were going down. 2020, that was the first year that the state paid for all students to take the ACT. And we went from 72% of juniors taking it to 82%. So that first year, our composite dropped because we added 10 more percent, and we knew that was going to happen. We're going to have to get to where we're consistently level again. Most states that do a statewide contract for ACT are between 90 to 95% of all kids taking it. Last year, the percent went down because of COVID. And ACT says in its 50-year history, it was the largest learning loss that they'd seen last year after COVID. But we hope a lot of work on that. We hope to turn that back around. Steps that we've been doing to move forward. As you listen to this group, we don't, as a state, have a budget unless the legislature appropriates for things like professional development. But with our 10% set aside that we were able to use with the federal ESSER, we've invested a ton of over $15 million into what we call letters. It's a LETRS. It's an acronym. You won't remember what it is when it's done, but it's on the science of reading. And we've invested $15 million in our large districts that were most heavily impacted with remote and hybrid to get all K through 3 teachers trained in the science of reading. And we'll be working on that over the next 3 years. We will then expand to more suburban and more rural, partnering with our service centers. We cannot find, the field, cannot find a math, fluency, literacy product that we can go out and purchase to use. So we're working with some national experts. Todd Wiedemann and our staff are partnering with them. We're going to create one for Kansas. That way when it's done, we own it. Our goal is to have that ready to roll out next fall. So we're addressing reading literacy. We will start rolling out a math literacy next fall. honestly, you know, you can imagine our elementary teachers are overwhelmed because many of them teach both reading and math. So we're focusing first on the reading literacy. We'll roll out math next fall. The other piece that we're investing heavily in is assessment literacy. One of the keys, and you've heard them talk about it, is I need to know where Billy or Susie is. I've got to diagnose it quickly. I've got to do it multiple times throughout the year. I've got to understand what their challenges are, and then I need to have the evidence-based practices right here to be able to implement. So we're also investing a huge amount into assessment literacy across the state for our school districts that are using Renaissance, they're using FastBridge, the ones that are already doing those measuring. We hear over and over from, we need more literacy on how to use those tools. So we've invested in that. We also have the Hansen Scan competency. This is what we've been using since the original tour. How do we teach those kids how to self-regulate, how to persevere, how to set goals, how to time manage? We call those the competencies that a lot of our kids just don't have. So we're investing more into that. You've probably seen on the highway, higher paths. That doesn't have a lot to do with early literacy, but that has. We've had a huge decline in students going on to post-secondary, especially in career and technical. So we've invested in trying to get parents more informed on that. And then we created a new website. We had immediately, we could not do professional development in person. And it's still challenging, but a year and a half ago, we created an online website called the Kansas Teaching and Leading Project. You can go to the link, but there are resources on there that are modules that teachers can get to for free 24/7. It's interesting, it's actually being hit more by people from out of state all across the country. Of course, there's more teachers in Texas and California. Those are the two largest states that are using our website. I don't care, it's free, but our teachers came together and created, and we funded the development of that. I can answer questions at any, I'm just trying to hit the things that were emailed to me to cover. Graduation rates, for the first time in since 2015, and you can even go back further, we dropped from all students from 88.3 to 88.1. Just note, we lost 15,000 kids last year during the pandemic, and we don't know where they went. Our graduation rate, it's a 4-year cohort. Our goal is 95%. We would love 100, but we know our most cognitive and students with disabilities can stay till 21, and we work with them. So we try to accommodate that. We know we got a population are not going to graduate in 4 years, and nor should we try to push them to graduate because they have services. But for the first time, we don't know where those 15,000 went, but if you leave a public school and homeschool or go to a private non-accredited, it counts against. The only thing that counts is if they go to a private accredited, that kid transfers to their graduation cohort. Anything other than that, so we expected a little bit a loss on that. We did. One great thing is our African-American students saw a significant, I would say statistically, significant increase in graduation rates last year. Overall, we went down a little, but our urban or our African-American students, it was great to see that. Just on slide 16, our post-secondary, half of our freshmen now graduate and 2 years later are still enrolled in attending a post-secondary institution, whether it's a junior college, a technical. So 1 in 2 students, we need to get to over 70% because that's what our economy needs. But that's been grown up to, and we call it an effective rate. We don't want to just look at, well, what about the kids that graduated? We want to say, well, let's look at freshmen in high school and take into consideration some of them don't graduate. 50% of our high school, it's 58% of our graduates, but we look at it when they're freshmen because we want to make sure they first graduate high school and second enroll in some 2-year, 4-year technical. So we're pleased with the gains in that. The challenge we've all heard is a lot of kids didn't go back to post-secondary. We don't know what those numbers are going to look like yet because, again, we look at it 2 years after high school graduation, and we think a lot of kids, at least from higher ed, we're hearing they did not go on. There was also a question about cut scores and performance levels. I don't know if you want me to, I've got information on that.
On the handout slides, mine's not pulling up, but.
Slide 17. So when you look at cuts, the word standards gets used several ways. You have content standards, and then you have performance levels. So Kansas educators, every state sets those separate. And then you have to get approved from the U.S. Department of Ed based on the process you went about doing it. They don't really care where you set it. They just want to know the process you went about. The biggest difference under No Child Left Behind and then recently was our old test back from 2002 to 2013. The question we asked teachers is, what should all students need to know and be able to do at each grade level? All kids. The last time we set cut scores, the question was, what should a student need to know in order to be successful at college rigor work? Two totally different questions. So immediately the teachers raised the bar. All right. If you look at, and I'm just going to kind of give you the process, there's a visual that you can take, for example, 6th grade. They stacked 80 questions, easiest to hardest, and then those teachers sat there and said, at what point would I put a mark in here to say that kid, I'm confident they're prepared, even at 3rd grade, 4th grade, to keep going in order to do college level work. And that's how they went about. So performance levels are, where are you at level 1? Level 2, if you read the performance descriptors, they're doing work very well at 4th grade. But they're not doing at a level where we think they're on track to do college rigor math or English language arts. And that's where they had to set that. And we've talked about it before on slide 21. When they finally did studies on where states set that mark to say they're doing college-ready work, 2 groups worked with NAEP to look at where states fell. We set it highest in the country in math and English language arts. That was our teachers. That's what we asked them. And I know people have brought up, well, what about Missouri? Well, if we'd have set it where Missouri, we would have 62% of our kids just like that. By adopting Missouri's, we moved to 62% at 8th grade. Florida, we're at 57. And just comparing, Missouri's at 47. So it's where our teachers set that. That's why we also have to look at other measures like the ACT and the pre-ACT to say, well, what are other measures showing how our kids are doing? Overall, we are not happy with where we are. I'm glad we have some resources to support what they were telling you we need to do. We have a long ways to go. Our biggest challenge, just example, the letters training on the science of reading, our schools can't find subs. So they're trying to adjust and go to online module trainings, but the teachers are, I got to do it in the evening. It is, we were hoping a year ago at this time, we would not be dealing with still wearing masks. We would not be dealing with quarantining. We would not be dealing with any of this. But our teachers, we're having a hard time getting teachers to find subs. Dr. Watson this morning announced our agency, once a week, we can go out and sub in our school districts to relieve, at least to try and keep those buildings open. And so we're going to start doing that too. So, Madam Chair, I know that I kind of glossed through a lot of that, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That's great. I do have one question, but I will hold mine till the end. Representative Estes.
Thank you for the explanations and answers to my questions. On your last slide, you show us as our standards as the highest, but I want to make sure that I'm clear in my mind. When we look at our NEEP scores, that's one universal test, and the kids who get that universal, no matter what state they're in, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so when we look at test results and compare those specific test results and compare ourselves to other states, we're still way underperforming. That would be a correct conclusion?
I would say we're about mid in the 20s. We used to, I would say go back to 2007, we ranked in the top 5 in the country on NAEP in everything. And starting in about 2010, just like our state assessment results, we started falling by, so that you are correct. We are about middle in the states right now with NAEP. I will not correct, but that slide, that's not where our standards are. That's where we set that cut score that says level 3. Our standards are what they should know at every grade level. So that slide, that's why I said we use the word standards in multiple. That's where we set the cut score.
And I was trying to listen to you and skim the slide. I'll save the rest for later. Thank you.
Okay, well then I will just end with one question then, and it is on the cut scores, and I apologize, my Mac is not pulling it up, so I am not able to see your testimony, but I'll get it, so it's not a problem. My question is also on, thank you, yeah. My question is on the cut scores. So if we were to look at it, and you said 80 questions, is that approximately how long each of the assessments are? Let's just take, let's say it's a math assessment or ELA, approximately 80 questions. So if you're doing that, when you say cut scores, can you give us an idea of how many questions they would need to get correct to be proficient? Because, I mean, are we talking about 50% of the questions out of 80 that they answer correctly?
I wouldn't know that answer, but
because
it's not a percent. Because if you look at any large-scale assessment, for example, ACT, or SAT's the same, the bar exam, it's when you get around 55 to 60%, then they say you've demonstrated proficiency. And it's not a percent, it's a degree of the difficulty of the assessment. Because if you take, for example, ACT, it's a scale of 1 to 36. So an 18 on English language arts, that's only like half, but they'll tell you that's not half the questions. You might look, well, they only got 50%, so that's an F. That's not the way large scales are set. They're set to where you can measure like a 28 on the ACT, only about 11% of the population will get a 28 or higher. So you can't say, well, 28 into 36, that's, maybe an 85%. That's why you can't convert it to a percent, because they're not designed to be a percent correct. They're designed to measure a level of difficulty.
Okay, so that is helpful. I'm wondering if there's any other way that maybe offline we can, you can help me understand, how do we really understand what that number means? Because it seems perhaps it changes state to state, they use it differently. I don't know, if I look at a cut score of 60, let's say, I don't know what that means for what that student knows at that grade. I don't know what they don't know and what they do know. I understand that the level 1, 2, 3, and 4 from 2015, the way we describe it has changed, or from 2017 is changed. We used to say that they were at grade level, and now we just changed terminology. So I'm wondering if there's any way to even do a one-page white paper on it.
There's actually on our Kansas assessment website, there is a parent guide, an administrator guide, and what you have to look at is the performance level descriptors, especially at the grade level that the teachers, so what's a 2 mean? Well, then you can go in there and you can look and it'll say, well, your child can demonstrate complex, it can describe, and then you go to the level 3, it just takes you to, well, instead of being able to do it with 2 graph multiplication, you can now do it with 3. So that's the importance is looking at that, because that'll tell you what they can actually do.
Okay.
Instead of, I don't know what C means.
Okay, Representative Estes.
Sorry for going twice, but you hit on a passion of mine, because as a parent, I have gone through that system over the years with all 3 of my children who graduated from Kansas public schools, and I have found the information to be so incredibly vague. So last year and this summer, I sat there and read a lot of it, and I feel like we're all looking for a fresh start here. We're looking for real solutions, and we're talking about how things are in an honest way, which I think is a good step forward to fixing these things. So my feedback as a parent and someone who represents other parents is they find this information far too vague. You get, in the lower levels, you get feedback that here's what your child missed, and there are things that are easy for you to understand and say, oh, okay, Johnny can't do double-digit subtraction. I can work with him on that. As your child progresses through the system and the vagueness continues and the broad size of the categories, there's a lot that you miss. And you get, here's what your child didn't do well. It's written in the standard lingo, which isn't parent lingo, and so parents don't really know what that means and how they help their child. So I hope as we look at this issue, we'll look at how we incorporate the parent more in putting this in terms and giving parents in the home resources. For example, we now have children on computers because of our response to the pandemic. So couldn't there be a preset set of exercises and instruction for your child that we actually maybe we replace homework altogether, and with our testing system, here's what your child missed, and you can sit down and work with your child on this at night. This is what we're doing in the classroom during the day. And getting back to the broadness of the categories, you don't see if your child changes much, because they're so broad. Maybe your child was a low 3 and now they've moved up to a high 3, and that helps you as a parent. Maybe your child is slipping and from a high 3 to a low 3, and you need to know that, but that the categories as a parent seem so broad, you don't feel like you're equipped with what you need to know. So, thank you.
All right, Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On slide 11, we talked about the Kansas CAN competency, the interpersonal and interpersonal cognitive, so social and emotional learning. Is that K-12 broad-based grade level appropriate, or are we targeting into a specific age group when we begin to introduce those concepts?
That's a great question. When we, there's a lot of materials out there on those sets of interpersonal and intrapersonal and cognitive skills for the younger grades. The group that works on this, the Kansas Can competency, is actually out of KU, and what they were finding, 7, 8 years ago was that there's not a lot of resources for educators at middle school and high school. So they started developing what does it look like in a sophomore level math class? How can I also teach kids while I'm teaching math how to persevere, self-regulate, and time management? I mean, things like that. So they started developing the competencies. We started contracting with them 6 years ago after the commissioner and I went on that first tour, and Kansas said, we've got to focus on that. They're just down the street. So it was predominantly high school, middle school. They are now, even though there's a lot of resources nationally out there, they are now moving it down to the lower grades as well.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I do have one homework assignment request, and I think this will be beneficial to the entire community, or that entire committee, as we look at third grade literacy. So if we think about cut scores, performance level descriptors, the PLDs that you have, and thank you for giving me your paper, on slide 19, then could you tell us the difference between somebody that's in level 1 and 2, which would not be proficient, not quite where they need to be, versus 3 and 4, specifically third grade ELA. So what I'm trying to look for is what do our kids not know specifically in third grade that would separate the group 1, 2 from 3, 4. So then maybe we can look at that and see what we can learn. Yes, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I add on to that? Because I've gotten a couple emails and just heard out and about in the community talking about the percentage of students that are graduating college ready. And so I would like that feedback in there on those levels of what students are considered to be college ready. Because looking at the scores, and you go from, you said it, but is somebody with a 299 is in the blue here, and then is somebody with a student with a 300 is in the orange. So are we really saying that there's a huge group in this blue group that's not ready for college? I would just be curious to get a little bit more information on that.
Might be difficult, and I would love to hear what you have to say, because the last time that you're going to test them would be either their ACT or their 10th grade state assessment. I know that the Regents takes a look at remedial courses or developmental courses and what percentage that is. But Brad, is there any other way to measure that other than success after?
Well, if I think I hear you right, we could do similar to what ACT does. ACT will report at a state, okay, so you had 49% of your students hit the college ready mark, which might be a 22 or higher. But they'll also say, but you had another 18% within 20 to 22. So that what they're trying to, and we used to look a little bit at that during No Child Left between 2002 and 10 is, while you're presenting a level of proficiency or whatever or higher, don't forget, you got a bunch of kids just at, so our cut is at a 300. You might have another 18% within shouting distance. They're right there. So now the schools know that. Schools see every student and they know where they're at and what, so when you're taught, and Representative Estes, I'm with you. I'm like the worst guy you want at a parent-teacher conference, because I'm like, really? I want to know more of that, oh, he's polite, and that goes into the assessment literacy stuff we're working on. They have what they need to have those conversations, and they know those. At a state level, we could probably look at what percent are within shouting distance of that. We will be redoing our whole cut score system in a couple years. We do it every so often. We haven't realigned our current ones because we also look at others. On a student level report, the parent and the student get not only where I was, a needle showing where they're at, but on the back it also tells them now, based on where you're at, if you were to take the ACT, which a lot of kids have, kids like you that scored there in Kansas also scored here on the ACT. It's just a little more because they're two totally different, but anyway, I'll write that one down as well.
Thank you. Could I add one more thing to that? Just kind of what I'm trying to get to the bottom of, if you will. I was at a community event with the business community. Somebody had made a comment that Kansas only graduates 21% of its students college and career ready. And just from what I'm seeing here, that doesn't seem to be the case. And so I would just prefer your interpretation of that, please.
We can also provide some information from Kansas regions. Nationally, they say about 40% are college and career ready across the United States. There's a variety of measuring tools for that. And I believe that the regions will give a number little less than that. Representative Estes?
I read their regents report that they issued. So I think where that might be, the number you heard might be coming from is ACT releases where you are, and they have 5 different categories. And I believe the number was 23% are proficient in all 5 categories. The category where Kansans did best was at 42%, and I think that might have been math. It could be ELA, but I have that report in my office if you'd like to come by. I don't have it electronically, or I'd be happy to send it to you. But that's where that number came from.
It's in one of your slides, the ACT stuff, and it's actually, yeah, you can look at the different levels.
Okay, so we can also get that region's information, but thank you for sharing.
Well, and I'd really appreciate hearing that from KSDE.
Sure.
Please, thank you.
Well, they're going to have different measurables, so you can take a look and see how KSDE measures that success versus the regions, and then you can compare the two and have both of them. Well, we appreciate your time today. We also thank our panel, especially those that drove such a far way. Clearwater, it is a long way away. So thank you very much. Committee, please stay in touch with the panelists on this issue. And Brad and Craig, always thank you for your time. Committee, we are adjourned.